So I saw this video by an NBA channel that I watched where he watched an NBA game from every decade, and I thought, hey, I should do that, but for the NFL. I am gonna watch an NFL game from every single decade from the 1940s all the way up to the decade we're in now, the 2020s. So I decided the best way to go about this was to pick one game from each decade and analyze it as thoroughly as I can to try to find how the NFL has changed over time and what we can possibly learn about the game of football. Anyways, let's just get right into it. So after looking through YouTube and other websites to find the best games from the 1940s, which was not easy, believe it or not, I ended up finding the 1940 NFL Championship game between Washington and the Chicago Bears. Now, this game wasn't the most competitively close, but in terms of a storyline and the effect it has on the NFL today, I think this is definitely the most impactful game from the 1940s, and this is why. So, as this game got underway, it's honestly unrecognizable from the modern game today. Something I noticed about this game pretty early on is that different formations like the shotgun wasn't even invented yet, so quarterbacks would either just take it from under center or would stand insanely far back and have the ball launched to them like it was a punt. Also, the game was just a lot more physical back then compared to today, because although the players weren't as strong and precise with their tackles and movements, they also didn't have the same technology and safety procedures we have today, so the game was a lot more dangerous because of those factors. This was literally one of the first plays of the game, which went for an obscenely long touchdown run, but also these two guys just get absolutely annihilated by one hit. That's something you just don't see nowadays. And some other things that I just found interesting about this 1940 championship game was that they used to have people just hold the ball on kickoffs so the wind didn't blow it away. Just another example of a lack of technology back then, which, you know, is obvious, but still. You could also see that the NFL level had yet to evolve past the college level as a whole, as most plays run, like the Wildcat formations that we know today, were primarily run in college schemes and hadn't yet evolved into NFL original formats of that same play. I also noticed that the Bears lined up primarily in the T formation, where the QB would line up under center and behind him would be a fullback flanked by two running backs, and the Bears used this throughout the entire game to dismantle Washington's defense. And it did a really good job of keeping them confused as to who was getting the ball, a concept that is actually still used today. For a more modern comparison, this game really reminded me of that Patriots vs Titans game a few years back in the wild card, except the main difference being the score, because the Bears ended up winning this game by oh yeah. They won the game 73-0. Another huge thing that I noticed throughout this game was it seemed like players just didn't exactly give as much effort as they do now, and this actually surprised me. Overall, this game was kinda boring because it was a 73-0 slaughtering, and most of the plays throughout this game were just runs down the middle with very few passes, and when there were passes, they weren't for very many yards at all. But this was a good start for the NFL and showed the potential that a game of football could really have. Now, we move on into the 1950s of football, and the game that I chose to pick in the 1950s to watch was not much of a challenge for me, because the 1958 NFL Championship game between the Colts and Giants has always been regarded as one of, if not the most important game ever played. So, what better game to watch than this one? Alright, the first thing I noticed with this game is that the kicking is really bad, and they all kick the ball straight on rather than using a soccer kicking style that's utilized today. And as the game progressed, it was a stalemate for the most part, and it was clear to me that Johnny Unitas was the best player in the entire game, and at the time, the league as a whole. He was able to control the game to a way that I honestly didn't know he had in him. It was also clear to me that what gave the Colts the advantage in this game was their big three of Lenny Moore, Raymond Berry, and Johnny Unitas. And more specifically, the QB connection between Unitas and Berry was way far ahead of its time. Johnny Unitas and Raymond Berry had that Aaron Rodgers to Devontae Adams feel to them, where Unitas almost knew exactly where he was going to go and where the defender was going to go, and the only position he could put the ball in that would have led to a catch. Now, I could be wrong when I'm saying this, but the evolution of defense as a whole was ahead of the evolution of the offensive line. Techniques used by linemen nowadays weren't even thought of back then. It used to be just keep the other guy in front of you, and if you can't, then hey, that's tough. The play just dies, I guess. Everything was also just a lot more unprofessional. Like, look at this. This just doesn't happen. where a player has to avoid people just strolling around on the sideline. But just like in the 1940s, there was a lot more running the ball than I'm used to in the modern NFL nowadays, for sure. I noticed that throughout this game, Unitas does a pump fake on damn near every single pass attempt, and his pocket presence is very strong, especially for his era. And like I said before, Unitas really does stand out compared to the other players. Like, what is this guy even doing? Anyway, in all seriousness, it actually did get really intense at the end. Unitas led an insanely clutch 84-yard drive with time expiring, and on the last play of the drive, Unitas threw a huge pass to Raymond Berry, that connection that I was talking about earlier, for 21 yards, and then without being able to stop the clock, the Colts had to have their field goal team sprint onto the field, set up, and kick a field goal before time expired. That kick somehow ended up going in and forced overtime. I also forgot to mention that this entire crowd was almost all in the favor of the Giants, and they were booing the Colts about every single time they took the field. And if it wasn't obvious enough to you yet, the field conditions were, not great. But the game continued, and on this play, it's probably 4th and inches or so, and the Giants decide to punt the ball to the Colts. Now, I'm sorry, but I can't help but think that nowadays with the analytics at our disposal, you go for this every single time, especially with someone like Johnny Unitas on the other side of the ball, who you know will get the job done. And that's exactly what happened, because the Colts started driving using the aforementioned T formation from the Bears the whole drive and picked them apart with checkdowns. Really, this felt like I was watching a Tom Brady drive, I'm not gonna lie. And what's crazy is that right before one of the last plays of the game, about 5 fans just run onto the field and cause a stoppage during the most important part of the football game. Like, actually, just imagine if that happened nowadays. Nevertheless, Unitas throws a pass down to the 1-yard line and then hands the ball off to his running back, Alan Amici, who had a pretty solid game, and that's that. What was long regarded as the greatest game ever played was over, and it was pretty entertaining, I'm gonna be honest. It still holds up today a lot better than I thought it would be, and maybe that's just gonna be a theme for all of these games. And we move on to maybe the most famous game in NFL history, the 1967 NFL Championship game between the Cowboys and the Packers, also known as the Ice Bowl. Now, I'm sure you've heard at the very least a little bit about the Ice Bowl. All you need to know is that this rivalry between the Cowboys and Packers was historic and long-standing, and is still going today, and this game was played at an inhuman -15 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest football game ever played, in a championship game. So as the game was going on, absolutely none of the players had any nerves left in their body and could barely move their fingers or legs to even move forward, but somehow they played this game. Something that I also found really interesting throughout this game and the past decades was that the fullback was an extremely important part of just about every single offensive play. Not only were they a rushing threat where the quarterback would hand it off super quickly to the fullback where they wouldn't be able to see who had the ball, but they would also pick up extra defenders and went out for passes on every single passing play as well. But it's just something I thought I'd point out, because the position is all but dead today. Anyway, on the first play from scrimmage for the Packers, they literally fumbled the ball, most likely due to how cold it was, and it turned out this was going to be a theme for the entire game, because given the circumstances, this game was going to be ugly no matter what, due to the horrendous conditions. And just like in previous decades, the technology was still severely lacking. So these dudes who were just playing football in -12-degree weather just had to stand on the sidelines when they weren't playing. Like, God, that's gotta be like a crime nowadays or something. It was very impressive to me throughout this game how easily Bart Starr, the Packers quarterback, was able to pass the ball with the weather, and he was absolutely torching the Cowboys with his arm. And he also used the run game pretty well to keep them confused. Alright, I'm gonna be honest with you, for most of the game at this point, it was honestly pretty boring, but once this play happened, the intensity revved up, the momentum completely swung, and the game went into maximum overdrive. Straight out of a timeout, the Cowboys ran a genius option pass that fooled the Packers, and Falcons and Broncos head coach Dan Reeves throws a touchdown to the Cowboys to give them a lead. The running back threw a touchdown in the coldest game in NFL history. How this happened in the 60s, I couldn't tell you. But after some back and forth, the Packers got the ball back and had a chance to go on a long drive that would end the game. And after a crazy drive of runs and short passes, the Packers got themselves into the red zone deep inside the 5-yard line, where the Cowboys actually had a really good defensive goal line stand for a long time, but then the famous sneak by Bart Starr happened, coming on the very last play of the drive. And this play ended up winning the championship for the Packers, and just like in the Colts vs. Giants game, fans just start smacking the players in the end zone. Like, God, imagine if this happened today. So that's how one of the most legendary games in NFL history ended. But in terms of difference from the 1960s and 50s, 50s, I really didn't notice too much, but a legendary game nevertheless. And with that being said, we move into Super Bowl 13 between the Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So going into this game, the headline was Roger Staubach versus Terry Bradshaw, and the steel curtain of the Pittsburgh Steelers against the vaunting defense of the Dallas Cowboys. Both teams had great top receivers and running backs, and it was thought to be a high-flying game. And that's exactly what it was. But it didn't look like that early on, because the first drive of the game for the Cowboys was just Tony Dorsett, their Hall of Fame running back, doing absolutely whatever he wanted, but then the Cowboys got a little cocky and did a double reverse handoff for some reason, and it led to a fumble because it looked like they just hadn't practiced it enough. This led to the Steelers getting the ball, and immediately I realized that Terry Bradshaw has an incredible ability to throw the ball under pressure. The dude just straight up has balls. He's able to stand in the pocket and take massive hits while delivering dimes in the process, something you just don't see from quarterbacks nowadays. And as the drive went on, and throughout the entire game, the Steelers just killed the Cowboys with their top two receivers, Lynn Swann and John Stallworth, betting that the Cowboys can't guard these guys one-on-one. So after a beautiful catch by John Stallworth, the Steelers decided to switch it up a little bit on defense by doing an unconventional amount of blitzing, which was able to get to Roger Staubach on multiple occasions. I also just wanted to point out this block. It's just beautiful to watch. That's all I wanted to say. Now, at this point in the game, I've noticed that the players seem to care a lot more, and the hits are so much harder than they were in the 50s and 60s. And because of less restrictions, I think the hits are almost undoubtedly more ruthless than they even are today. So Terry Bradshaw's gunslinger mentality did lead to some terrible interceptions like this one. And then after this fumble, the Cowboys were able to score, and the momentum was completely in Dallas's favor at this point. So the Steelers come back onto the field for their next offensive possession, and Terry Bradshaw almost throws a pick, but doesn't. Then on the very next play, he fumbles, and the Cowboys return it for a touchdown, and at this point, the game seems almost over. But then, literally on the first play from scrimmage on the Steelers' next drive, 75-yard touchdown. Of course, right. Well, what else did I expect? Throughout this game, the Steelers seemed to focus on one receiver per drive, which was kind of weird to me, but I guess it worked, and they got a huge touchdown right before the half to take a 21-14 lead. Now, this is the most famous moment in the game, the Jackie Smith drop. This drop was really huge, I'm not gonna lie. The momentum would have gone straight back to Dallas, especially because they stopped the Steelers on their next drive. And if they had scored that touchdown, they would have approached their next drive completely differently, which would have created a different outcome for the entire game, but it didn't happen.
Franco Harris is one of them. Sometimes you walk in a huddle, he doesn't have to say anything. His calves are pulsating, and the linemen know, let's get him something going.
There's a fumble. Pittsburgh has it, I think. Pittsburgh has the ball.
What the is this? Like, what? What? Okay, I know that the Jackie Smith drop gets all the blame for the Cowboys losing this game, but after watching the entire game, I just don't understand that. Yes, that drop was awful, but what the actual was this? It's a shame because Randy White, one of the best players in Cowboys history, had to be the one to have a historic brain cramp that led to an immediate Steelers touchdown. And to me, this was the main reason why the Cowboys would end up losing this Super Bowl. Staubach did an incredible job throughout the entire game, picking apart this legendary Steelers defense, but it just wasn't enough. It was also pretty easy to figure out that these two teams were the best in the league and had the most talent by far, with so many Hall of Famers between both teams. The two quarterbacks, Bradshaw and Staubach, did stand out the most, and on the last drive, the Cowboys literally did whatever they wanted. Roger Staubach looked like he was invincible, but it was just too little too late. And the Steelers should go on to, oh my god, they got the onside kick. But it didn't matter. The Cowboys go right down the field and score, but the Steelers finally get an onside kick, and the game is over. Incredibly high scoring game, 35-31 in favor of the Steelers, and an absolute classic to say the least. Now, this next game we're looking at is the 1981 divisional game between the Miami Dolphins and the Chargers. I know this game is only a few years later, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I wanted to watch this whole game anyways. I looked at other games in this time period like the drive and the fumble, but this game, which was super high scoring, just seemed a little bit more interesting to me, I'm not gonna lie. So let's look at this game, which was considered an absolute abnormality for its time period. So going into this game, it was a highly anticipated one, as the Air Coryell offense and the weak defense of the Chargers Chargers was going against a strong defense and a weak offense of the Miami Dolphins. And this was a stat they said before the game, which was kind of crazy to me, but for the second year in a row, Kellen Winslow had led the league in receptions as a tight end. Now, as the game began, things were going well for the Dolphins for about 4 minutes until the Chargers returned to punt for a touchdown, putting the Dolphins in a 10-0 hole pretty early on in the game. Now, the fact that this even happened was incredible because the Dolphins hadn't given up a punt touchdown in 6 years at this point, and the Chargers hadn't even scored one in 4. But don't worry, the special teams play only gets worse because on the ensuing kickoff, the Dolphins just decided not to touch the ball, and the Chargers basically just recovered a 60-yard onside kick. And San Diego immediately took advantage and scored a touchdown right away. And it somehow gets worse as the Dolphins throw an interception early on their next drive, which led to another quick Chargers touchdown, putting the game supposedly out of reach at 24-0 at the end of the first quarter. But this game is legendary for a reason, because now the Dolphins decided to bench their starting quarterback David Woodley for John Strock, and that gave the Dolphins life. Now, to take a break from the play-by-play, what I noticed most about this game is that it seemed more like a modern game compared to the other decades at the very least, where teams heavily relied on the pass rather than the run. Also, the guts it takes to even attempt a play like this. It seemed like teams back then were a lot more willing to throw laterals, and I just don't understand why. Anyway, this game was just pure entertainment. One team would throw a punch, and then the other, and that's how the game kept going for almost the entire time. I honestly don't know how else to describe this game other than that. The thing that kept this match extremely entertaining was that you could tell how tired the players were getting as the game progressed. It kind of brought up a little bit of a relatable element to the game that we're just kind of missing nowadays. Now, at this point in the game, the Dolphins finally took a 38-31 lead in the game, as their defense had picked up while the offense was able to score non-stop with their new quarterback in. Also, just look at this play. This came off of a Dan Fouts interception and another lateral, which led to nothing. Like, they really needed to chill out on the laterals back then. The Chargers then went down the field after the Dolphins scored and got a touchdown with a minute left and forced the Dolphins to go win the game themselves. But on the field goal kick that would have ended the game, it was partially blocked by none other than Kellen Winslow, the tight end. I also noticed that throughout this game, the receivers are starting to more look like modern ones that we see today. Just big guys who are able to go make catches and absolutely overpower everyone else on the field. The route running is obviously not up to modern standards, but that's not really to be expected. Anyway, with that missed kick, this led to overtime, and the Chargers won the toss and drove down the field and got a great look at a field goal, which would have won the game for the Chargers, and he missed it. Now the Dolphins get a shot at winning the game with a field goal themselves, and it's up and was blocked by guess who? Yep, Kellen Winslow, the tight end. So with new life, Dan Fouts led the Chargers down the field and got another shot at a field goal, which finally went in, and the Chargers limped off the field as victors. Wow, what a game. In terms of what we can learn from this game, it was really just a shootout, something that you would not expect from a game in the early 80s. It honestly reminded me of that 2018 game between the Chiefs and Rams, where both teams were just airing the ball out, doing whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Don Coryell, the Chargers coach, was truly ahead of his time, and that backup quarterback magic was somehow able to get the Dolphins back into this game and keep them there for the entire time, just down to the very last second. So now let's move on to the 1990s, where I had so many games to choose from, but I decided to go with the 1992 AFC wildcard game between the Oilers and the Bills, better known as the comeback. So right off the bat, this game was easily one of the weirdest that I've ever seen in my life. The only real comparison for this game would be that Kansas City versus Houston game a few years back in the playoffs, and there's a common denominator here. Anyway, but for the first half, it was all Houston. And while watching this game, I had a feeling that the Oilers were getting kinda lucky, and this massive lead would not last for long. Now, little did I know that the game would be a 28-3 blowout at halftime. Now, I had a feeling that the Bills would start a small comeback, but that didn't happen at all, because on the first drive of the second half, the Bills proceeded to throw a 58-yard pick six to make it a 35-3 game. Now, the Bills got the ball back and had a 4th and 2 on the 8-yard line, and if they were to fail on completing this first down, the game would have been over, but that didn't happen. So there was still some hope, I guess. I also just wanted to say that Warren Moon has an interesting drop back where he starts off on the left and then switches to the right side, whereas Frank Wright has a more conventional drop back that we're used to seeing in the NFL today. Also, during the 90s, I think the NFL became somewhat refined, and the product on the field is very close to what we see today in terms of overall skill and intensity, the only main difference still being the lack of modern technology as a whole. I was also really impressed how into the game the crowd was after being down by 32 points in the third quarter. Now, the Bills got a touchdown, and after bringing the lead down 35-10, I guess you can call it that, everything went downhill for the Oilers in one quarter. Sorry, in 10 minutes of a quarter. Score after score after score later, the Bills bring the game down to a 35-31 score right before the quarter ended. And at this point, the only word to describe the Houston Oilers side of things is panic. Every time they touch the ball, there is either a turnover or almost a turnover. They just can't keep cucking themselves. The worst part about this game is that they aren't even going against the Bills' best quarterback because Jim Kelly, literally one of the best QBs of all time, wasn't playing due to a sprained knee. Finally, in the fourth quarter, the Oilers get back to basics. They relied on Warren Moon's ability to make plays, and he did for the most part until he threw another pick. But there was a penalty, so the drive goes on. But anyways, after catching a break, the Oilers meltdown picks right back up. As they're lining up to kick a field goal that would have put them up by 7, they box the snap and turn it over. Then let the Bills march right down the field and score another touchdown, taking a lead, which means that at this point, the Oilers had blown a 35-3 lead in about a quarter's worth of playing time. But Warren Moon wasn't done yet. He proved why he's a Hall of Famer by trying to patch up the leaks on this Oilers team, leading them down the field for a game-tying field goal, forcing overtime. And maybe things were turning around for the Oilers, because they ended up winning the coin toss, and wow, okay. Oh my god, they lost. Okay, so we move on to the 2000s, and we're gonna look at Super Bowl 43 between the Cardinals and Steelers. This game is legendary for so many reasons. The headline going into it being the resurgence of Kurt Warner's career and the young gun Ben Roethlisberger leading this Steelers team. And right away into this game, it's weird to see Ben Roethlisberger actually good at football again. It's crazy how we forget how amazing he actually was at avoiding pressure and making plays on the run, the complete opposite of what he did at the end of his career when that amalgamation of flesh was walking around throwing 2-yard checkdowns to Najee Harris. But anyway, plays like this one just shows how special of a talent prime Ben Roethlisberger actually was. The Steelers came into the game showing Super Bowl experience and showed it early, scoring pretty quickly in the second quarter after a stalemate in most of the first. Now, at this point in NFL history, technology was pretty much modern in terms of what people actually know about football, and if you took any of these guys on the field and dropped them cold turkey in the NFL today, they would be just as effective, if not more impactful than they were in this time period. It's also really nice to finally have a scoreboard, by the way. You also forget how amazing Kurt Warner actually was, even so many years removed after those MVP years with the Rams. Like, look at this play right here. He's literally falling over and throws a dangerous pass and lets his tight end absolutely moss the defender for a touchdown. Absolutely wild. Also, for the most part, Ben Roethlisberger played a pretty great game. He throws an interception here, but it was deflected, and for a 6'5" quarterback, I'm sure he wasn't used to that happening. And don't worry, Ben Roethlisberger will be back, because he doesn't take no for an answer. But it shouldn't have mattered that he threw this pick, because the next possession, Kurt Warner almost throws an interception himself, but it wasn't picked off, so then the Steelers somehow let Tim Hightower get through their defense and pick up this huge first down with a minute left in the second quarter. I also just wanted to say that as more things change, the more they stay the same. Quarterbacks like Ben Roethlisberger in the year 2008 were using the same exact techniques as guys like Johnny Unitas used way back in 1958, like the classic ball pump fake move that I mentioned earlier to throw the defense off. Also, formations like the aforementioned T formation used by those Bear teams in the 1940s were used by both teams in this game alone. It's just kind of cool to see how the game has evolved by the decade. I just wanted to throw this play in there. What is Troy Polamalu doing? Then right after that play, the biggest play of the entire game by far happens. This incredibly timed blitz by the Steelers leads to Warner not being able to pick up on the fact that James Harrison faked his blitz and he throws an interception. Now we watch as this 250-pound man lumbers his way down the field, somehow breaks like 10 tackles and falls in the end zone and lies on the ground a Super Bowl hero. Now there wasn't very much action from the third quarter, so we move straight into the fourth quarter, where it should be said that the Pittsburgh Steelers have done an incredible job of locking up Larry Fitzgerald for the entire game to this point, and daring any other wide receiver to beat them. So after a long drive on 3rd and goal, Kurt Warner decides to take a chance, hoping that his best player will make a play, and he does. Then the defense of the Cardinals is asked to make a play, and they do. So Warner and the Cardinals get another chance, this time hopefully to take a commanding lead. But the Cardinals get stopped, and because this game is absolutely wild, they down the kick at the 1-yard line, and this Steelers guy does this for some reason, but at this point, the game really feels like a modern NFL football game. The Cardinals, once again, get new life with a holding in the end zone, which results in a safety, and now they have another chance to take the lead. And then it happens. Larry Fitzgerald finally breaks free for a long play, and the Cardinals have a lead. I also just want to take more time to appreciate this play by Ben Roethlisberger. He was just so good at throwing under pressure. Throughout the game, I also noticed that it was weird that Santonio Holmes was the Steelers' #1 receiver, instead of other guys who were usually more involved like Hines Ward or Heath Miller. And on the last drive for the Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger almost gets stripped right here, which would have ended the game. And then a few plays later, he ended up throwing into the end zone, and a pass went right through the hands of Santonio Holmes. And if he had caught that pass, it would have ended the game there, but it was a tough catch in the first place, and it's safe to say he would get his revenge.
Pass time, throws to the back of the end zone, and it is caught for a touchdown.
Yeah, this is still one of the best catches in NFL history, and the perfect ending to one of the best Super Bowls ever. Alright, we move on to the 2010s, where we look at Super Bowl 49 between the Seahawks and the Patriots. Now that we're in the 2010s decade, I'm sure that this is the most familiar one to most of you guys watching this video right now. And for me personally, I remember this game very well. As the game begun, the Patriots did their regular offense of checkdowns and 3-yard runs, and it looked like they were easily going to score until, oh my god, Tom Brady actually threw an interception, but the Seahawks couldn't capitalize on the turnover, something that would be a problem later on. A few slants and 4-yard runs later, and the Patriots are in the end zone. And honestly, I think that we took for granted how amazing this offense actually was, and how beautiful the Patriots were able to play as a team. They really had a complete reliance that the guy right next to them would get the job done, and almost every time they did, and that's really what made them a dynasty. It was at this time that Chris Matthews emerged as someone who could give the Patriots corners problems, and that led to a short 3rd and 2 situation, and the Seahawks ran the ball in for a touchdown. The Patriots answered back, and this game so far has been your average back and forth for the most part. At the very end of the half, with only one play left to run, Russell Wilson decides to give one of his receivers a chance at a one-on-one, and it's the Foot Locker employee, Chris Matthews, who mosses the Patriots for a last-second touchdown right before halftime. Then as the 3rd quarter begins, he does it again to get them 3 points on the board. So now Tom Brady has to respond, and I'm not gonna lie, he was getting fooled in this game an unorthodox amount of times, as Bobby Wagner baited Tom Brady to force another interception. And if you don't take advantage of every possession in this game, it just might cost you. So the Seahawks made sure that that didn't happen, and Doug Baldwin uses a down screen from the referee to free himself from Darrelle Revis and makes the lead a 24-14 one in favor of the Seahawks. A few punts later, and the Patriots are trying to find some life. And on this play, on a 3rd and 14, the Seahawks had a chance to completely put themselves in the driver's seat, but the Patriots picked up the 1st down and kept the drive going, which a few more 3rd down conversions later led to them being in the end zone. I also wanted to point out that at this time, Richard Sherman was only thrown at 1 time throughout the entire game. But with that being said, after a Patriots touchdown on a classic white guy route, the Seahawks had a chance to start their team as a new dynasty in the NFL and take down the old one in the Patriots. They drove down the field with ease until, like in all games we've gone over so far, an absolutely historic play takes place, with Jermaine Kearse's juggling catch to go down deep into the red zone. How the hell did he catch this? And at this point, all the Seahawks had to do was hand the ball. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this. I can't.
Play clock at 5. pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler.
Okay. Anyways, now we move on to a game that literally just happened in last year's playoffs. The 2022 AFC Divisional Round, the Chiefs versus the Bills. And if you watch this game, then I'm sure you can remember almost everything that happened like it just happened yesterday. Right away, the Bills drive down the field and are in a 4th and goal situation. Now, coming off of looking at past eras, teams would not even hesitate to send out the field goal unit. Literally, in that Cardinals Super Bowl we went over, the Steelers were in the exact same situation and they decided to kick it. But in the new era of football, with the modern analytics we have, so many more teams are willing to go for it with numbers backing up their choices. And this gamble pays off for the Bills as they score a touchdown, and you had to score touchdowns to keep up with this Chiefs offense. And just like that epic in Miami game, this game had fireworks, and a lot of them. The Chiefs ended up scoring 2 touchdowns in a row, while both offenses were still using extremely creative play calls to gain a small edge over their opponent. The Bills score their first touchdown to Gabriel Davis. Yes, I said the first touchdown, you'll see why later. And the Chiefs missed a crucial field goal at the end of the half that would have given them a lead going into halftime, but they made up for that kick on the first possession of the 3rd quarter, so I guess it didn't really matter. But looking at this game in the bigger picture, it's amazing to compare this game to the ones we saw earlier in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. The players are just playing with a much higher intensity. Everyone is just so much bigger, faster, and stronger. The techniques are borderline flawless compared to back then. The schemes are polished, and the talent level is just unrecognizable from the NFL's early days. Anyway, so Gabriel Davis ends up shredding the Chiefs defense again for a long touchdown to keep the Bills in range of the lead. And like I said before, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Just like in the epic in Miami, the momentum can be swung by one good punt return, which is what happens here. So after another field goal made by the Chiefs, the Bills convert a huge 4th down. Once again, it's Gabriel Davis time, and the Bills take the lead with 2 minutes left. But this is why the NFL is so different than past years. One of the first plays from scrimmage for the Chiefs ends up being a catch and run play by one of the fastest human beings on the planet for a touchdown that should have given the Chiefs the win and would have undoubtedly so in the past. But this is not the past. And once the Bills got the ball back, some more Gabriel Davis magic leads the Bills down the field, and Gabriel Davis catches another touchdown, this time with 13 seconds left on the clock. Okay, now the game is actually mathematically over.
Defense got beaten up like that. This here's Hill. They're gonna have a chance.
Right away, right now, someone in the middle. Down the middle. Oh my goodness!
Hundreds of thousands around the planet. The kick is good!
Huh. Okay, I guess we're going overtime. And this overtime played out a little differently than the other ones we looked at. The Chiefs won the coin toss, and against a bruised and battered Bills team that gave it all they had, they went right down the field and called ball game. So, that's it. But what did we learn from watching an NFL game from every decade? Well, I think the most important takeaway is that no matter the era of football, no matter the skill level, NFL football is NFL football, and it's entertaining no matter what. And throughout the entirety of NFL history, people didn't just make up new concepts out of nowhere. Everything new from the 50s came from the past decades in the 40s and 30s, and everything new from the 2020s came from the experiences of teams in the 2010s and in past decades too. Every single one of the games we went over are regarded as some of the best in NFL history, and as we've seen, for good reason too. Without these games, football wouldn't have been able to captivate so many people, and the game of football wouldn't be even close to as widespread as it is today. So overall, I hope somehow, some way, you learned a little something about NFL history, and maybe, just maybe, this video made you appreciate the game of football just a little bit more. But if you enjoyed this video, then like and comment, and you can subscribe if you think I've earned it. And if you like this video, then you should watch this video I made on the evolution of the quarterback position. It's really good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.